In 2009, a Dutch geographer named Chris Rage was sitting at his desk comparing satellite photographs. He had spent 30 years studying land degradation in Africa. He had watched the Sahel shrink. He had read the reports from the 1980s that used phrases like permanent desertification and irreversible land loss. He thought he understood what degraded African soil looked like and what it did not come back from. And then he put two images side by side. Same location, same coordinates in Niger, one photograph from 1975, one from 2005. In the first image, bare, pale, compacted earth as far as the satellite could see. In the second image, taken 30 years later at the identical spot, trees, crops, green, not a thin scatter of struggling vegetation. Dense, continuous, productive land cover across territory that every scientific consensus of the era had classified as gone. He had to look at the images multiple times before he trusted what he was seeing. The change was too large, and the more disorienting part, the part that stopped him, was that there was no government program, no foreign aid project, no imported technology, no irrigation canal. Farmers with hand tools and one technique so simple you can explain it in a single sentence had reversed what the world's leading development institutions had declared irreversible. That technique is what this video is about. By the end, you are going to understand exactly how it works, why it performs the way it does, and specifically how to use it on dry, degraded land in the United States right now, in Texas, in New Mexico, in Arizona, in Oklahoma, in every state where the same problem with your soil and your rainfall. The land does not degrade for one reason, it degrades for many. When soil has been overgrazed, repeatedly tilled, or stripped of its plant cover for long enough, it develops a surface crust. You can see this crust in any compacted garden path, any hard-packed field edge, any bare patch in a dry yard, that pale, smooth, slightly shiny surface that water does not penetrate. Rain hits that surface and sheets off. In the Sahel, where annual rainfall arrives in intense events over a narrow window of 2 to 4 months, and the remaining 8 months are completely dry, this runoff is the entire problem. A 40-millimeter rainfall event on crusted Sahel soil produces roughly 35 millimeters of runoff. The water that fell is gone within hours, flowing into gullies and off the land. The farmer watched it rain and still has dry soil. This is the mechanism of desertification. The land simply stopped being able to hold what was falling on it. Rage did not just publish the images and move on. He went back to Niger. He wanted to know specifically what had happened between 1975 and 2005, because satellite images show you that something changed, but they do not tell you why. He started interviewing farmers in the villages where the transformation was most visible. He walked the land. He looked at what was physically different on the ground between the green zones and the bare zones. And what he found was not a technology. It was a shape in the dirt. Farmers across the region had been building small semicircular earthen ridges on their slopes by hand, using hose, during the dry season when there was no other farm work to do. No organization had taught them. No NGO had funded them. Many described learning it from their fathers or from neighboring villages. Some said they had simply noticed over years of observation that areas where soil had naturally mounded against a rock or a fallen branch always grew better crops after the rains than the flat, open ground around them. They had formalized that observation into a deliberate structure. The structure had a name in the local Masi language. Researchers would later call it a half-moon bund, and when Rage mapped where the bunds had been built against where the green appeared in his satellite images, the correlation was almost exact. A half-moon bund is a semicircular ridge of compacted earth. It is open at the top, curved end facing downslope, built across a gentle slope at the point where surface water naturally flows. When rain falls and water begins sheeting downhill, it hits the curved wall of the half-moon, loses momentum, and pools inside the crescent. Pooled water has time to infiltrate. It pushes down through the crust. It reaches subsoil that has not been wet in months. A single bund concentrates the runoff from the entire slope above it into a planting area roughly 8 to 10 feet in diameter. The researchers who measured this found that a bund on a 2% slope in a 400 millimeter rainfall zone creates effective moisture conditions at its center, equivalent to 800 to 1,200 millimeters of annual rainfall, 2 to 3 times what physically fell on that ground. No water was added. Water that would have run off was captured instead. Each bundee takes one person roughly 40 minutes to build with a standard hoe or mattock. You mark the semicircle with a string and stake, open end uphill. You excavate soil from the interior and pile it onto the curved ridge, compacting firmly. The ridge needs to be at least 8 inches high. You shape the two ends of the crescent slightly higher than the middle, so overflow in a heavy rain exits over the wings rather than collapsing the wall. That is the entire structure. There is no hardware. There is no material cost. There is compacted earth in a shape that redirects physics. Now here is where the 30-year satellite transformation begins. The crop planted at the center of the bund is not just producing food. It is building soil. Leaves fall, roots penetrate and die and add organic matter. The biological activity of a single productive plant changes the soil chemistry in a ring around it. Organic matter improves infiltration rate. Better infiltration next season means more water reaches the subsoil. More subsoil water means more plant growth. More plant growth means more organic matter the following year. The bund is not harvesting the season's rain. It is building a soil that harvests more effectively every single subsequent season. The green in Rage's 2005 photographs is not one good year. It is the compounded result of this feedback loop running for 2 to 3 decades, multiplied across millions of individual bunds built by millions of individual farmers. But the yield numbers only become extraordinary when the specific crop sequence is added. And if you think the basic mechanism was impressive, what comes next is what the World Bank researchers called one of the most cost-effective agricultural discoveries in their entire assessment history. In the first season, you plant a fast-establishing grain inside the bund: pearl millet, sorghum, or in a US context, dryland sorghum, tepary beans, or native grain amaranth, whatever your climate supports and your family eats. This is your first season food return while the soil begins recovering. In the second or third season, once the bund wall has stabilized and the central soil shows improvement, you add a single nitrogen-fixing tree seedling at the center and move your grain crop to a ring around it. In the Sahel, this tree is Phaedherbia albida, one of the most botanically unusual organisms on Earth. Every deciduous tree you have ever seen drops its leaves in autumn and grows them in spring. Phaedherbia does the exact opposite. It is bare during the wet growing season, competing with nothing, shading nothing. It leaves out during the dry season, when its canopy drops nitrogen-rich leaf litter that decomposes into the soil before the rains arrive. Field measurements in Burkina Faso documented grain yields under mature Phaedherbia canopy at 50 to 100% higher than identical crops in the same field outside the tree's influence. It is a free fertilizer system that runs itself, powered entirely by the moisture the bund is collecting underground. The specific numbers from the World Bank assessment are worth saying plainly. Construction cost, $15 to $40 per hectare. First season yield increase, 40 to 120% compared to untreated land in identical conditions. No other agricultural intervention assessed in the same region in the same period produced anything close to that ratio. Now, let's be specific about the United States, because this is not a technique that belongs only in West Africa. The American Southwest, the Southern Plains, and the Great Basin share direct ecological parallels with the pre-restoration Sahel. Shallow soils over hardpan or caliche layers, annual rainfall between 8 and 18 inches, intense runoff events on compacted surfaces, and a documented history of large-scale land degradation through overgrazing and repeated tillage. The USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service has mapped over 100 million acres of severely degraded dryland in the continental U.S., with runoff losses directly comparable to pre-restoration Niger. The same physics that applied in Burkina Faso applies in Brewster County, Texas. The same compounding biology that rebuilt soil in Maradi applies in the Estancia Valley of New Mexico. The adaptation for U.S. conditions requires one main substitution. You are not going to find Phaederbia albida at your local nursery. What you will find, or what grows wild on your property already, is honey mesquite across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Mesquite is nitrogen-fixing, deeply drought-tolerant once established, and produces edible pods that are among the highest-calorie wild foods in the Southwest. It has been unfairly demonized as invasive scrubland, but in the center of a half-moon bund, contained, managed, and deliberately harvested, it performs the same structural role as Phaederbia. In the Midwest and Southern Plains, black locust is the equivalent. It grows aggressively in marginal dryland soil, fixes nitrogen at high rates, produces dense hardwood for posts and fuel, and tolerates the drought and heat of a Kansas or Oklahoma summer without irrigation. In the Intermountain West, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, four-winged saltbush is a native nitrogen fixer that establishes readily in highly alkaline, low rainfall soil where almost nothing else will. The crop inside the bund for a U.S. dryland context starts with dryland sorghum or grain amaranth. In the first season, both are native to hot, dry environments. Both produce meaningful caloric yields in conditions where corn and wheat fail without irrigation, and both establish quickly enough to begin building soil biology before the tree seedling is added. In the Southwest specifically, tepary beans are the traditional companion, a bean variety domesticated by the Tohono O'odham, specifically for desert conditions, producing protein-rich pods in soil moisture levels that would stress any commercial bean variety to the point of crop failure. The construction process on U.S. dryland is identical to the Sahel method. You are looking for a slope between 1 and 4%, shallow enough that water slows in the bund, steep enough that runoff actually flows into it. In Texas and New Mexico, the natural topography of most degraded range and dryland farm property provides exactly this gradient across large areas. You mark your semicircle upslope, excavate and ridge, compact the wall, plant at the center. A single afternoon establishes 3 to 5 bungs. A weekend across a quarter acre of degraded slope establishes 20 to 30. By the second growing season following a normal rainfall year, the interior of each bund will show soil color, moisture, and plant density visibly different from the surrounding land. By year 5, with the nitrogen-fixing tree established and beginning to canopy, the difference will be measurable in yield numbers and visible to anyone who walks the property. If you have dry land, degraded soil, or a slope where rain sheets off and nothing grows, you are looking at the same thing those Niger farmers were looking at. Subscribe before you leave. See you in the next video.